I know, like I get these massive pains, like just shooting up into my ear, and I'm like, is this anxiety? It's like at one point I had heart palpitations. I'm like, okay.
For months, a quiet struggle brewed behind the scenes. It wasn't just stress, fatigue, or pressure. It was something deeper, something unseen. A shift had taken place in the heart of the man portraying Jesus. What began as a role gradually transformed into a sacred burden, one that grew heavier with each passing day. The line between performance and presence blurred until it nearly disappeared altogether. In the still moments before filming, silence often hung heavy in the air. The actor would sit, unable to speak, his spirit overwhelmed by emotion. There were no lines to forget, only the weight of what he was about to represent. Tears would come without warning, not from sorrow or pain, but from something sacred stirring within. Words once memorized now struck with unfamiliar force, echoing not from memory but from something divine. Off camera, he wrestled with more than exhaustion. He found himself praying more, fasting regularly, leaning on confession and spiritual discipline. What was once preparation for a role had become a lifestyle. He wasn't just portraying Jesus, he was being drawn into a deeper relationship with him. But this closeness brought resistance, a spiritual tension that followed him like a shadow. The toll wasn't just emotional or psychological, it took on spiritual form. The kind of struggle that doesn't show up on camera but presses down on the soul. The set, usually buzzing with energy, would fall into moments of eerie quiet. The cameras rolled, but the scene felt off, not because of lighting or sound, but because something deeper was at war beneath the surface. Each day the battle continued. The production faced delay after delay. Equipment would fail, actors would get sick, plans would unravel. There was an invisible force working against them, one that grew stronger as the scenes grew more sacred. The spiritual pressure was undeniable, persistent, and personal. In moments of stillness, the lead actor would retreat inward. It wasn't about preparation anymore. It was about surrender. He began to realize that this wasn't just a project. It was a calling, and callings come at a cost. On the days when the story turned toward the more sacred milestones, the Sermon on the Mount, the Last Supper, the crucifixion, the air itself seemed to thicken. A quiet reverence fell across the set. Each shot carried a weight that no one could quite describe. As the camera rolled, the energy shifted. It wasn't just storytelling anymore. It was embodiment. The performance became a kind of offering. The man portraying Jesus carried more than just the character's robe. He bore the weight of meaning behind every gesture, every movement. His eyes often filled with tears not cued by a script, but by the gravity of what each scene meant to so many. These weren't just reenactments. These were sacred echoes, relived with reverence. Despite the fatigue, the confusion, the inner conflict, he pressed on. His spirit was battered, but not broken. Something inside him knew this mattered, not just for him, not just for the show, but for every person who would see a piece of truth through his performance. That truth, he realized, was precisely what stirred up so much spiritual resistance. Even in rehearsals, there were moments that felt impossibly intense. Scenes where a slap landed and it wasn't just choreography, it was symbolic. Where the actor, in full costume, took on not just the physical appearance of Christ, but something of the emotional weight. The audience, the crew, everyone present felt it. They weren't just filming a TV show, they were brushing up against something eternal. Filming Holy Week brought a sense of culmination, an approaching storm, both literal and metaphorical. The triumphal entry, the tension in Jerusalem, the final days of Christ's earthly ministry, it all came crashing in with an intensity no one was ready for. Fatigue deepened. Sleepless nights became more frequent. The spiritual toll began manifesting physically. And yet, through all of it, the actor remained, weary but grounded, not in himself, but in the one he was trying to represent. He didn't seek out attention or glory. He simply asked for strength to get through the day. He knew something unseen was pushing back, but he also knew something greater was holding him steady. As the final days of filming approached, the atmosphere thickened with both expectation and exhaustion. The scenes of betrayal, trial, and crucifixion loomed like a shadow over the set. Every actor, every crew member seemed to feel the weight of what was coming. The mood was quiet, contemplative. It was as if the entire production had been slowly moving toward this single point: the cross. During one of the crucifixion scenes, nature itself seemed to respond. The skies turned a darker hue, clouds rolled in, and a storm began to gather in the distance. The actor, suspended high on the cross, bore more than the simulated suffering of a scripted moment. There was a profound stillness in the air, an unseen tension gripping everyone watching. Then, suddenly, lightning struck, not an effect, not a cue, actual lightning, cracking across the sky and striking near the cross. Everyone froze. For a moment it felt like the veil between the physical and the spiritual had torn open. No one spoke. They didn't need to. What they had just witnessed went beyond coincidence or weather patterns. It was a sign, a punctuation mark on all the unseen forces they had been grappling with since the beginning. The actor came down from the cross not in fear, but with a deeper sense of purpose. He had been experiencing strange symptoms throughout production: heart palpitations, physical discomforts, bouts of unexplained emotional weight. He had gone through medical checks, tried to make sense of it, but always came back to the same conclusion. This was something spiritual. It wasn't paranoia or superstition. It was real, tangible, relentless. But within the pain, there was clarity. The battle he was in wasn't a curse. It was confirmation that what they were doing mattered, that this was more than performance. It was ministry, and ministry often comes at a cost. He began to change the way he prepared for scenes. No longer relying only on rehearsals or scripts, he leaned into spiritual disciplines. He spent time in prayer before stepping onto set. He attended Eucharist whenever possible. He received spiritual direction weekly. He fasted. He carried a rosary in his pocket. These weren't habits of performance. They were tools of survival and of surrender. Even when the storm passed, the spiritual pressure didn't. But by now he understood it better. He wasn't just an actor. He was a vessel, chosen not for comfort, but for purpose. And that purpose required endurance. As filming continued, there was a shift in the way the crew approached their work. It wasn't just about getting the shots anymore. It wasn't just about creating a show. There was a profound sense of spiritual responsibility that seemed to hover over everyone involved. The world they were depicting, the world of Christ's suffering and sacrifice, was becoming more than a backdrop. It was becoming a mirror to their own experiences. The actor felt this transformation deeply. He started seeing every moment of struggle on set as part of the larger battle. The more they worked on scenes like the Sermon on the Mount or the Last Supper, the more he felt a personal connection to the story. It wasn't just an external role to play. It was an internal reality to embrace. The pain, the fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness, it all mirrored the journey of Christ himself. Behind the scenes, the actor began reflecting on the cost of his participation in such a profound project. He would retreat to quiet spaces between takes, not to rehearse lines or go over his performance, but to pray. He sought the strength not to perform better, but to step out of the way, to let the story of Christ shine through him. He knew the challenges were only going to escalate, but so too did his desire to serve the story in the most authentic way possible. As the crew prepared for some of the most difficult scenes, the betrayal in the garden, the trial before Pilate, the crucifixion itself, the pressure mounted. It wasn't just the logistics of filming that weighed heavy. It wasn't just the physical demands of being on set for long hours. There was something much deeper at work, something spiritual. It became clear that the closer they got to these pivotal moments in the life of Jesus, the greater the spiritual resistance they encountered. Each day on set, there was a sense of anticipation, but also of weariness. The actor could feel it in his body, his spirit. It wasn't just a battle for the role, it was a battle for his soul. Yet as much as the attacks came, there was an undeniable truth. The more the resistance mounted, the more the purpose of what they were doing became clear. And then came the realization that this wasn't just about the actor. It was about the impact of the story on the world. People were writing letters telling their stories of how the show had changed their lives. Marriages were healed, addictions were broken, people were turning back to God. The actor read each letter with a deep sense of gratitude, but also humility. He knew the work was not his alone. It was a collective effort, a spiritual mission. As the filming of the final scenes drew closer, the actor found himself grappling with something profound. The magnitude of the story they were telling. Every moment, every scene was heavy with meaning, not just for the viewers, but for the people telling it. The experience of playing Jesus was no longer just an acting role. It was becoming a personal transformation. He found himself being shaped by the very character he was portraying, being drawn closer to the faith and the message of Christ. There was a particular moment during the filming of a key scene, the crucifixion, that underscored this transformation. It wasn't just the physical toll of performing the scene. It wasn't just the emotional weight of portraying such an agonizing moment. It was something more. As the actor stepped into that scene, something seemed to shift in the air. The weight of history, of divinity and humanity intersecting, settled around him. The actor, feeling the gravity of what he was about to portray, began to question the role he had been given. What did it truly mean to represent Jesus? How could anyone possibly capture the full depth of that experience? The moment of self-doubt was fleeting, quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He knew, deep down, that this role was not about him. It was about the message. It was about the truth that needed to be told. And for this reason, he gave everything, physically, mentally, and spiritually, to the task at hand. There were days when the burden felt unbearable, when the weight of the responsibility seemed too great. But in those moments, he remembered why he was there. It wasn't for fame, recognition, or praise. It was to tell the story of Christ, to give voice to the truth of his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. And every time he stepped onto that set, he recommitted himself to that purpose. The tension on set was palpable. There were moments when everyone seemed to feel the pressure of what they were doing. But there were also moments of deep connection. The crew, the cast, and the director all shared in something sacred. There was an understanding among them that this was more than just a production. This was an offering. It was a collective act of faith, and it was being witnessed not just by those on set, but by millions of people around the world who would one day watch the show and experience the message of Christ in a new and powerful way. As filming progressed, the actor continued to experience something unexpected. The connection between the character of Jesus and his own personal faith deepened. With each scene, it was as if the lines between actor and character blurred. The actor wasn't just speaking words or performing actions anymore. He was living them. Each prayer, each gesture, each expression was infused with more meaning. He was, in essence, becoming the vessel through which something divine passed. The weight of this transformation was not always easy to bear. There were moments when the actor found himself physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and spiritually tested. He would retreat between takes, not to rehearse but to pray. There was a deep need within him to remain grounded, to remember why he was here, and to stay connected to the divine presence that had guided him through this journey. The actor was not alone in this experience. As he grew closer to his role, he began to see the spiritual toll that it took on everyone involved. The crew, too, was deeply affected by the project. The presence of something larger than themselves seemed to permeate every aspect of the production. There was an undeniable spiritual intensity that surrounded them, and they could all sense it. The set wasn't just a place where scenes were filmed. It was a place where sacred ground was being tread. But this sacredness didn't come without resistance. The further they got into the story of Christ, the more obstacles seemed to appear. There were production delays, personal struggles, and moments of deep spiritual warfare. The actor felt it more than anyone. He described the experience as an invisible pressure, a constant weight on his shoulders, a force that sought to deter them from telling the story. But through it all, he held firm. He leaned into his faith and prayed for strength, for clarity, and for the ability to be a conduit for something greater than himself. The intensity of the spiritual battle was not limited to the actor's personal experiences. It extended to the production itself. There were moments when everything seemed to align. The lights were perfect, the sound clear, only for something unseen to disrupt the flow. It was as though the story they were trying to tell was being fought against, not in the physical world, but in a realm beyond their control. But instead of backing down, the cast and crew pressed on, their determination fueled by the belief that they were part of something far bigger than themselves. In these moments, the actor found himself questioning the weight of the role he was playing. How could he, a human being with all of his flaws and imperfections, possibly embody the divine? The struggle was real, but so was the calling. He wasn't just playing a character, he was representing something holy, something sacred. The actor reflected on the immense responsibility of portraying Jesus, understanding that the role wasn't about him, but about the message that needed to be delivered. The spiritual journey didn't stop when the cameras were turned off. In the quiet moments between takes, when the cameras were set down, the actor would turn to prayer, seeking guidance and strength. It wasn't just about perfecting his performance. It was about staying connected to the truth, about letting that truth shine through despite the challenges. The weight of portraying Jesus became more than just a physical or emotional challenge. It was a spiritual one. The actor's life began to revolve around practices of deep faith. He turned to prayer, fasting, confession, and spiritual direction to help him navigate the profound experiences he was going through. With each day, he found himself drawn deeper into the story, and the sacredness of the journey started to shape his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. As filming progressed, the intensity of the spiritual battle escalated. Each scene felt more like a divine calling than an acting job. The actor was no longer just reciting lines, he was embodying something far greater. With each word spoken, he was speaking truths that had the power to change lives, truths that reached beyond the boundaries of the screen and into the hearts of viewers. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of the role seemed unbearable, when doubts crept in and the pressure felt too much to handle. But these were the moments when the actor realized that his role wasn't just a performance. It was a message, a calling, and it required sacrifice. This wasn't about fame, recognition, or personal achievement. It was about being used as a vessel for something holy, for a purpose far greater than himself. In the quiet between scenes, he would often retreat alone. It wasn't to rehearse his lines or prepare for the next shot. It was to pray, to seek strength not just to act, but to allow the truth of Jesus to shine through him. This was no longer about playing a role. It was about living out the message in a way that was authentic and true. The spiritual toll of the role was undeniable. The actor found himself constantly battling physical exhaustion, emotional weariness, and spiritual resistance. Yet, in the midst of these struggles, he felt a deep sense of purpose, a recognition that this was where he was meant to be, doing what he was meant to do. The more the production progressed, the more he understood that this journey wasn't just about portraying a historical figure. It was about living out the story of Christ and sharing that story with the world. As the filming moved toward pivotal scenes, the challenges grew more intense. There was a sense that the production had crossed into spiritual territory, where the stakes weren't just about creating something entertaining, but about carrying the weight of a story that had eternal significance. The filming of key moments like the Sermon on the Mount, the Last Supper, and the crucifixion carried a profound intensity. These were moments that demanded more than acting skills. They demanded an openness to the divine, a willingness to be used as an instrument to bring something sacred into the world. But with this deepened connection to the story came a heightened sensitivity to the spiritual warfare that surrounded it. The actor began to notice how resistance seemed to rise whenever something significant was being filmed. There were physical ailments, emotional struggles, and spiritual opposition that surfaced at the most critical moments. Yet instead of deterring him, these struggles only strengthened his resolve. The attacks were a sign that something powerful was happening, that the story being told had the power to impact lives in ways that went beyond entertainment. Through it all, the actor remained steadfast in his commitment to the role. He leaned deeper into his faith, finding strength in prayer, fasting, and seeking guidance from spiritual mentors. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about allowing the message of Christ to be spoken through him, regardless of the cost. The struggles, the resistance, the physical exhaustion, they were all part of the journey, but they were also part of the calling. The actor's understanding of the role deepened, not just as an actor, but as a vessel of God's message. He no longer saw himself as playing a character. He saw himself as participating in a mission, one that would reach millions of people. Every prayer, every line, every scene became an offering, a chance to make a difference in the lives of others, to shine light into darkness. As the journey continued, the actor began to understand the true depth of the spiritual battles he was facing. These were not just challenges on set, but reflections of the greater cosmic conflict playing out in the backdrop of the story. The more light they brought into the world through the chosen, the more resistance they encountered. Financial struggles, physical ailments, and delays in production were part of the pressure that seemed to increase with every major scene. But the greater the opposition, the more the actor found himself leaning into his faith. With every scene that captured a pivotal moment in Jesus' life, the actor became increasingly aware of the divine weight carried by those moments. Filming the crucifixion, for instance, was not just about capturing an event on screen, but about representing the ultimate sacrifice, the profound suffering of Christ. The weight of this responsibility was overwhelming, and yet it also brought clarity. It brought a deeper connection to the mission that was larger than any personal struggle or difficulty. The actor began to recognize that he was not simply performing, he was living in a space where his faith and his role intertwined. This wasn't just about portraying a character, it was about living out the story in a way that was deeply personal. His prayers, his moments of surrender, his efforts to stay grounded in his spiritual practices, all of these were integral to his ability to give his best in portraying Christ. The more he felt the physical and emotional toll of the role, the more he sought refuge in God. He knew that without divine strength, he wouldn't be able to endure. He began to understand that every sacrifice, every moment of vulnerability, was part of what made the message of Christ so powerful. It wasn't about perfection. It was about surrender. It was about allowing the Holy Spirit to guide him and trusting that the divine purpose of the project would shine through. The deeper the actor immersed himself in the role, the more he came to recognize that it wasn't just about the impact of the show or the physical portrayal of Jesus. It was about embodying the message in every aspect of his being. Every moment on set became a reflection of the spiritual journey he was living out, a journey filled with moments of struggle, self-doubt, and reflection. But in each moment, he saw himself not just as an actor, but as a vessel chosen to carry something sacred, something divine. He realized that the toll of playing such a significant role wasn't just about exhaustion or the weight of responsibility. It was about facing the spiritual battles head-on. The challenges weren't only external, they were internal as well. As he wrestled with the meaning of the role and its personal impact on his life. The reality of portraying Jesus was more than he had anticipated, especially when it came to the emotional and spiritual intensity it demanded. As the filming progressed, the actor continued to surrender more of himself. He leaned into prayer, maintained spiritual disciplines like fasting, and sought spiritual guidance. He understood that this was no longer about simply acting in a show. It was about living the story in a way that could resonate with people on a deeper level. This was a calling that required him to not only give his best, but to allow something greater than himself to shine through in his portrayal. And yet, despite the weight of the role, the actor could not ignore the overwhelming sense of purpose that began to unfold. He could feel it in the response from viewers who shared stories of their lives being impacted. Marriages were healed, lives were transformed, and the light of the gospel began to touch the hearts of many. With every letter of gratitude, with every testimony of change, the actor's understanding of the significance of his role grew. The sense of divine purpose became clearer with each passing day, and the actor, once uncertain, now stood firmly in the realization that the challenges were part of something greater. There was a deep understanding that portraying Jesus wasn't about creating a perfect performance. It was about becoming a vessel for truth, allowing the light of Christ to shine through in a raw, unfiltered way. It was no longer about his own acting skill, but about being faithful to the role in a way that transcended the screen. The difficulties on set, whether they were physical, emotional, or spiritual, felt like part of a larger story. The actor's personal journey intertwined with the message he was delivering, and as the show's popularity spread, so did the realization that this was no ordinary production. Each scene, each line spoken, carried the weight of divine truth, and the actor became more than just a performer. He became a messenger. In the quiet moments between takes, when the cameras weren't rolling, the actor would retreat into solitude, not to prepare for the next scene, but to reconnect with the God he was portraying. The burden of portraying such a pivotal figure on screen was heavy, but the connection to something deeper and greater than himself made it possible. It was a journey that asked for everything, comfort, peace, and sometimes even sanity, but it also provided everything in return. A closer relationship with Christ, a deeper understanding of the story he was telling, and a mission that he had never anticipated. The set was more than just a place of work, it became sacred ground. The actor's struggles mirrored the very journey of the person he was portraying. Each moment on set had the weight of divine significance, and he found himself wrestling with a deeper sense of purpose. The physical exhaustion from long hours on set and the emotional toll from portraying Jesus weren't just challenges to overcome, they were part of the sanctifying process. Despite the overwhelming pressure, there was a profound peace that accompanied the work. It wasn't an easy peace. It was a peace that came from the understanding that every hardship, every moment of doubt, every prayer was part of something much bigger. The actor wasn't just portraying a historical figure, he was embodying the heart of a movement that changed the world. Every take, every scene, every line was an offering to something far greater than himself. And with every scene, the realization grew stronger that the impact of the show wasn't just about entertainment. The stories of viewers touched by the show began pouring in, marriages healed, addictions broken, and prayer lives reignited. The actor would read these letters, and with each one it became clearer that the spiritual toll he had endured was worth it. The pain and exhaustion weren't in vain. They were a part of a much larger, much more significant story. The more he embraced his role, the more he realized that this wasn't just a job. It was a mission, and missions required sacrifice. He wasn't just an actor delivering lines. He was a part of a divine movement, a conduit for a story that had the power to change hearts and minds. And as he leaned into this purpose, the attacks and struggles only served to strengthen his resolve. With each scene, the actor's connection to the character of Jesus deepened. The emotions, the physicality, and the weight of the portrayal became more real than he could have ever imagined. What started as a role to play had transformed into a life-changing experience. His days were now filled not just with rehearsals and filming, but with prayer, reflection, and constant awareness of the spiritual battles surrounding him. Every moment on set became a test of faith. The external pressures, the tight schedules, the physical demands of portraying such a monumental figure, the relentless nature of the production, were compounded by the spiritual challenges. But despite everything, he had a clear sense of the mission. He was part of something extraordinary, something much bigger than the sum of its parts. Off camera, the actor would often seek solitude. It wasn't to escape the pressures of the role, but rather to reconnect with the source of his strength. He would pray, reflect on his relationship with Christ, and ground himself in the knowledge that he was there for a reason, beyond the acting, beyond the recognition, beyond the fame. It was a higher calling that demanded humility, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. And it wasn't just about performing for the camera anymore. He was living the role, embodying the teachings, embracing the pain and suffering. The moments of doubt he faced on set, when he questioned if he was worthy of portraying such a powerful figure, were all part of the process. They reminded him that the strength to continue wasn't from him, but from God. As the production continued, the spiritual battles intensified. He began to sense that every scene, every word spoken, was more than just an act. It was a spiritual declaration. The story was coming to life in a way that transcended entertainment. The actor realized that he was no longer just portraying Jesus. He was living the journey in his own way. The final days of filming brought even greater challenges. As the actor neared the climactic scenes, the Last Supper, the crucifixion, he felt the toll of the journey. The weight of the character had become more than just an emotional burden. It was a spiritual immersion, a living experience of Christ's suffering. The closer he got to portraying the ultimate sacrifice, the more he realized how deeply the role had reshaped him. He had come to understand, in a way that words could never fully express, what it meant to carry that weight. Behind the scenes, his commitment to prayer and spiritual growth continued to intensify. He fasted, attended confession, and sought spiritual guidance regularly. It was no longer about staying in character or perfecting his lines. It was about surrender, surrendering to the truth of the role, surrendering to God's will, and embracing the path laid before him, no matter how difficult it became. And in those quiet moments, when the cameras were off and the lights dimmed, he found peace. It wasn't peace from the absence of conflict or difficulty, but peace in the understanding that he was exactly where he needed to be. The storm, both on set and within him, was not a hindrance, but a confirmation that he was walking the path God had set before him. The actor's journey mirrored that of the character he portrayed. Both faced trials, doubts, and moments of intense spiritual warfare. But through it all, there was a sense of divine purpose. The experiences he had lived, the challenges he had faced, had all led to this moment of complete surrender and acceptance of his role. When the final scene was shot, and the cameras stopped rolling, he didn't feel relief, as one might expect. Instead, he felt a deep, humbling awareness of the journey he had just completed, a journey that had changed him. It wasn't just about acting in a TV show. It was about embodying the life of Christ, living through the same struggles, and understanding, even if just a fraction, what it meant to walk in his footsteps.